All right, welcome in everyone. We're going to go ahead and record our session today. So I believe Ian or Tanya will start the recording. Welcome to Stories That Matter, Creative Approaches to Qualitative Storytelling, the first of 4 research methodology sessions. My name is Deb Martinez, and I, along with Tanya Pinkerton, Rachel O'Flaherty, and Nicole Thompson, am one of the leads of GIFT, Global Innovation and Futures in Teaching, the hub of possible education futures labs. Thank you so much for joining us. So a little bit about GIFT and PEFLs. GIFT brings together educators from around the world to imagine new futures for education by using the Possible Education Futures Labs, PEFLs, as a structure to connect educators with others, explore possibilities, engage in projects, and share work. PEFLs challenge members to move past tinkering with existing problems and towards becoming aware of, exploring, and actively engaging with new possibilities for teacher education. They are semi-structured, applied possibility thinking spaces that are collaborative, iterative, and sustainable. They enable participants to unlock transformative possibilities for education and teacher preparation now and into the future. We are excited to support the PEFL's participants and other researchers through the session today. Now, let me introduce you to our amazing presenters. First, we welcome our Sandy Johnson, who is currently a third-year PhD student in learning literacies and technologies at the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State University. He taught in secondary schools in Indonesia for more than 10 years, was involved in Indonesia's Ministry of Education secondary English curriculum programs as a trainer of teachers, and was a Fulbright Scholar under the U.S. Department of State. His current interests are in intersectionality of disability, gender, race, language, and immigration, writing, narrative inquiry, storytelling approach, postmodernism, posthumanism, and art-based research creation. As a queer scholar, he is also exploring critical concepts of gender and sexuality. Next, we'd like to welcome Lindsay DiMartino, who is an assistant professor in the Division for Advancing Education Policy, Practice and Leadership at Arizona State University's Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation, or MLFC. Her scholarship and praxis center on transforming educational systems toward collective justice through critical inquiry, LGBTQIA2S+, joy and visibility, and community-driven leadership. She is grounded in years of experience as a special education public school teacher, inclusion coordinator, and district leader. Lindsay approaches research as an act of solidarity. She centers her work around storytelling and participatory methodologies with a touch of arts-based methods to contribute to resistance, belonging, and hope within educational spaces. She also co-leads the Storytelling Learning Futures Collaborative at MLFC. And I will stop sharing my screen so they can take it away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Stories That Matter, Creative Approaches to Qualitative Storytelling. Next slide. Okay, and so here's our agenda, so you know where we're going today. You've already met us, so we'll breeze over that. We'll talk about why storytelling is situated within qualitative research. We'll briefly talk about narrative inquiry, composite narrative. Then Ari will take off with autoethnography. In the middle of this presentation, we will have an interactive activity where you will get to write and talk with each other. And then to finish this presentation, Ari will talk us through arts-based educational research. Okay. We're delighted that you're here today. So welcome, welcome. And next slide. All right, like I said, you've already met us. but we did share our PowerPoint slides and a resource list with Tanya and Deb, and so you'll be getting that after this presentation. But you can take a minute and kind of look at us and how we identify as scholar activists, specifically our current projects that we are in the middle of. So I encourage you to look at that. Next slide. Perfect. Oh, ooh, ooh. All right, here we go. So we're going to start off with, well, why does storytelling offer what does storytelling offer qualitative researchers? So what we know, so this is meaning making, it's a lived experience, it's identity, culture, sense making. But it's also story as epistemology, okay? So it's these narrative ways of knowing. And in parentheses are examples of all of these, so concrete examples. So one of these would be narrative inquiry. So what is story as epistemology? It's that story is not just a technique, it's a way of understanding the world. People make sense of their lives through narrative. Stories shape our identity, our memory, and understanding of meaning. Knowledge becomes relational, contextual, and interpretive. Narratives reveal how individuals understand events, relationships, institutions, and themselves. And then stories acknowledge multiple truths rather than a single objective reality. One of my mentors is Kakali Bhattacharya, and if she was here, she would say, story as epistemology generate unique forms of knowledge that challenge Western academic traditions. They offer ways of knowing and emerge from the lived experience, cultural wisdom, and marginalized perspectives. Some key thinkers on this would be Bruner, Polkinghorne, Frank, Clandidin, and Connolly, and Kim, all of which are included on that resources list that we were talking about. So moving to story as method, how researchers engage narrative. Um, Again, you have examples in the parentheses on the slide. But story becomes a core method for collecting and interpreting the lived experience, okay? Through personal narrative, researchers can document patterns, analyze social structures, theorize power relations with systemic depth comparable to traditional research methods. The lived experiences reveal the effect of multiple societal structures. Okay. So storytelling disrupts colonial knowledge systems by centering indigenous, cultural, and marginalized ways of knowing, while reclaiming communities' right to produce knowledge about themselves. Some common threads that we see through these different methods are your attention to plot, temporality, and emotion, emphasizing voice and representation, understanding individual stories within broader cultural narratives. So that takes us to the third reason why what storytelling offers qualitative researchers, and that story is data. What counts as a story in research? Interviews become conversations. Okay, though that includes personal narratives, critical incidents, life stories. There's field work. These are observed stories in action, storytelling practices and context, right? There's also archives. Those are letters, diaries, transcripts, media, institutional documents that can lend themselves to storytelling. We also have artifacts. We have photographs, objects, digital traces, artwork. Okay, and we'll talk more about that at the latter part of this presentation. We have organizational narratives, and I think this is typically overlooked, right? You can look at mission statements, foundation myths, rituals, customs, practices, and then everyday stories, social media posts, informal conversations. So, why are stories powerful data sources? Because they reveal emotions, values, and meaning, not just events. They show how people interpret, justify, or reframe experience. They also expose cultural scripts, power relations, and institutional norms. And they invite deep reflexivity and relational understanding. So this will bring us to our first, this is a methodology, and it's a narrative inquiry primer. Next slide, please. So this is a primer because we can spend an entire workshop plus on narrative inquiry. Okay, and this is based on a foundational text by Clandenden and Connolly. Um, and their work is rooted in Dewey's philosophy of experience. Okay, so narrative inquiry examines how people make meaning across time, relationships, and place. It serves as both a phenomenon and a method. So, going to the core foundations of narrative inquiry, this includes experiences meaning making. Again, temporal, it's shaped by the past, present, and future. It's interactive, okay? It's influenced by personal, social, and cultural contexts, and it's continuous. It's perpetual. Experiences build upon one another, okay? And narrative inquiry focuses on how people interpret and reinterpret their experiences. Now, according to Clandidin and Connolly, they built a three-dimensional inquiry space. Okay, so they identify three dimensions that guide all narrative research, and that includes temporality, so how stories unfold over time. Researchers consider what happened before, what's happening now, and what might happen next. Okay. They also talk about sociality, so examining both. So your personal conditions, feelings, hopes, and reactions, and then also your social conditions, your cultural, institutional, and relational contexts. Then the third dimension is place, attention to the physical, the embodied, and the situational context of experience. So, what are the key components of narrative inquiry? There's field, so that's experience. Researchers enter participants' worlds, okay, forming collaborative and ethical relationships. And then there's field text, which is the data, right? Stories emerge through interviews, journals, letters, observations, conversations, artifacts, photos. Then we go to research text, which is interpretation. Research interpret or restory and represent experiences in ways that honor the participants' meanings. And we'll talk about restoring later in the presentation a little bit more than we are now. So just as a quick overview of what restoring is it's the process of analyzing and reconfiguring stories to highlight narrative structure, which includes plots, tensions, and turning points, meaning making, and contextual influences. Also, when we are engaging in narrative inquiry, we need to pay special attention to our relational ethics. Okay. And so narrative inquiry requires this ongoing relational ethical commitments. You are co-constructing stories with participants. You're being transparent about representation, and you're attending to vulnerability, and entering and leaving the field with care. So what does narrative inquiry produce? It leads to richly contextual accounts that illuminate lived experiences, reveal how people make sense of their world, connect personal stories with broader cultural narratives, and it embraces complexity over simplification. So if you take nothing from what I just said, please take the following statement, okay? Narrative inquiry does not generalize, okay? It deepens understanding. So now we're gonna roll into composite narrative, and this is one type of narrative inquiry that I use myself. So we're gonna spend a little bit of time on it. Um, and what that is, so what is a composite narrative? A composite narrative are stories that are created by blending data from multiple participants into a single synthesized narrative. Okay. There's common steps across approaches to a composite narrative. You are collecting rich qualitative data, so interviews, field notes, artifacts, etc. You are identifying themes that recur across participants. Okay, you are selecting sections and details that represent collective experiences within that these data, right? You are synthesizing multiple voices into one narrative structure. And then you are maintaining transparency about the process. So that's one of the gifts of composite narrative is this increased transparency, but also anonymity. Okay. Just a couple of approaches that I use in my own work is I use the Willis approach. So according to Willis 2019, they combine 3 to 5 interview transcripts into one story. They use verbatim quotations only. They draw all details directly from original interviews, and they avoid inserting research or interpretation into the narrative voice. Okay. I also look to Cook and Dixon, and this is a counter story approach where we create composite counter stories grounded in experiential knowledge. We build characters that reflect intersections of multiple participants' experiences, and then we align these to emergent themes with our leading theory. All right. Um, Using narrative disrupts the dominant story. Okay. And if you are oversimplifying and creating collective caricatures, then you are preserving anonymity without erasing context by honoring the participants' perspectives and experiences. So, how do we create a composite narrative? We start with the 5 acts of Freytag's pyramid, which is our next slide. Okay, and you might have seen this before, right? And so this is just kind of a really great place to start if you're writing a composite narrative. All right. You're going to start at exposition, right? It's the beginning of the story where you set the stage, you introduce the main characters, and some initial conflict is introduced, right? And then you go to rising action, right? This is a series of events and complications that build suspense and tension as the main conflict develops. Then you reach the climax. It's the turning point of the story, the most intense moment where this conflict reaches its peak, right? Then we go to falling action, where the events occur immediately after the climax, where the consequences of the climax begin to unfold. And then we have the resolution. This is the conclusion of the story, where the conflict is resolved and the story wraps up. So it's a very basic structure if you use Freytag's pyramid. Like I said, a good place to start. Okay, next slide. So when you're analyzing these stories, you're going to want to focus on meaning, pattern, and structure, not just content. All right? Look at character, setting, conflict, turning points, resolution, significance. And you have some guiding questions in the PowerPoint here. There are some other structures other than Freytag's pyramid. So more there's a 3 act structure where you have Act 1, where you set up your incident, Act 2, where you have rising conflict, Act 3, which is the climax and resolution. Bhattacharya and Gillian talk about a parallel structure that explores ethnodrama and other forms of arts-based research. But this particular article also it demonstrates how a scholar of color navigates mentoring a white student while they had starkly opposing values and experiences. So it runs in parallel. So it's a very interesting read in a different structure rather than Freytag's pyramid. And that brings us to our next methodology.
Yep, thank you, Lindsay, for the very comprehensive explanation about narrative inquiry. So we're going to the next one under the umbrella of narrative inquiry, that is autoethnography. So I'm gonna come to the definition first, of course, So what is autoethnography in here? If you see on your screen, there are four elements there: ethnography, self-studies, narrative inquiry, and hermeneutics. That's all uh, compounding, the autoethnography in here. So the simplest meaning of autoethnography is the definition of self-study. That's the simple meaning. But actually, while we are aware that there's a connection with ethnography, self-studies, narrative inquiry, and hermeneutics, we have the uniqueness of autoethnography that is about the subject of research. It is about you. It's about self, ourselves. So, autoethnographer is the subject of research itself, compared to ethnography and the other, ways of doing qualitative inquiry. So, let's see in here about autoethnography. It's a part of qualitative study that also incorporate these four elements. These four elements, I'm gonna try to explain a little bit about ethnography, focusing on studying about individuals in their communities. And narrative inquiry, as Lindsay said, also focus on stories, individual in different contexts. And also studies focuses on how tasks such as self-learning are undertaken and examined. And the last component is about hermeneutics, focuses on meanings of the past products. So yeah, we are looking at the past events in our life in doing autoethnography and try to bring that again, in this current moment and looking at our perspectives. As this is part of ethnography also, that's why we have the term ethnography in the end of, autoethnography. So author puts stories into a larger social context. So that's autoethnography. So we still put our stories into larger social context. So in doing autoethnography, it comes with a question: what am I learning by examining my identities, powers, privileges, and penalties with one or more cultural contexts? So that's our question from Hughes and Pennington. And I would like to talk about this one a bit because this is also my area, positivism, post-positivism and postmodernism. So this movement actually coming from challenging the status quo in doing research, based on positivism and post-positivism, where, uh, the representation is part of it, and then we always try to mitigate biases. While we are part of biases, we are always in biases. So by doing autoethnography, we're incorporating postmodernism that accommodate subjectivity, emotionality, and researchers' influence rather than ignoring the matters while recognizing them. We know that we're always in biases, but we always try to ignore them in positivist mindset. But in postmodern mindset, we try to embrace our biases, our subjectivities, and also our emotionality. So let's see, under that, there's different types of doing autoethnography based on Hughes and Pennington, 2016. The first one is analytic. Mostly it's only involving one researcher, and also we do also co-constructed that work together in building story, and collaborative that I'm doing now with our LLC members, that we bring our different stories, in one paper. So that's what we do now, collaborative. And also we can also do community, where the community talks about that. Like for example, tribal, participatory research that always involve community, like it's being done by Brown. And also critical constructed is also the same with co-constructed, where we try to challenge the injustices. And critical performance is the same with co-constructed, but the difference is we use performance. That's why it's called critical performance, that I will also explain through art-based educational research in the next session. And also there's a lot of more, if you see this source, there's a lot of types of autoethnography, like for example, reflexive, also narrative autoethnography. We also have, other different kinds. In here, I'm gonna bring different type that is not discussed a lot by Hugo Barrington. That is testimonials. Actually, it comes from the concept of testimonial in, I'm sorry for my Spanish, within Chicana and Latin and education. Unlike the more common training of researchers to produce unbiased knowledge, just like I mentioned, testimonio challenges objectivity by situating the individual in communion with a collective experience marked by marginalization, oppression, and resistance. Analyzing testimonial involves a critical intersectional lens to understand marginalized voices, focusing on power dynamics, cultural context, and the story's goal of liberation, often using methods like autoethnography, like what we are discussing now, and also critical race theory and post-colonial theory to see personal narratives resist oppression and foster social change rather than just seeing them as a literary text. It moves beyond traditional research by centering the narrator's experience, transforming the researcher into a participant in a dialogue for healing and empowerment based on Delgado. And I'm gonna also talk a little bit also about about Autohistoria by Bhattacharya, Kakali Bhattacharya and Keating, 2018, where autohistoria is used, actually citing from Anzaldúa, autohistoria. What is autohistoria? So autohistoria is used as a critical methodological and theoretical framework, originally developed by Gloria Anzaldúa, as I mentioned, to explore identity and knowledge generation. So the meaning of autohistoria theoria itself, history theory, is a specific methodology and theoretical approach that moves beyond traditional autobiography or narrative research. So what makes it beyond that? Actually, because personal narrative is not just source of data, it's not just source of data, but it's also site for generating critical theory. So it's not just data, our stories. Our stories are also uh, generating new theories, critical theories. So, yep, we are doing like a collaborative narration in Autohistoria, where the researchers jointly engage in the act of self-narration, recognizing that knowledge is not generated by a lone objective researcher, but emerges from rationality and also shared vulnerability, like also mentioned by Lindsay earlier. So the act of invoking, that's the next step in doing an analysis, that the act of invoking Astoria suggests drawing forth deep, embodied, and often difficult truth. Yeah, challenging status quo is always uncomfortable and also full of tension. So that's why sometimes it brings with difficult truth. It's a generative process that creates new understanding about social reality. So in brief, also about ethnography, we have two directions. The first one is about, traditional ways in doing that. For example, we do also data collection, data analysis, from our own or history documents or artifacts. And we do also like thematic analysis, coding, like other narrative inquiry. But also there's a lot of movements based on postmodernism that is anti representation of data, anti-reduction, reductive mindset of data that is coding. For example, I put also already in the sources that you can check the work from a master, using different types of data, was it autonography by presenting beginning as the introduction, telling the story directly, and then engaging in the theories through assemblage and yeah, doing like a conclusion with different ways that is about coming to home. I mean, in this text, they were trying to contest, the binaries of gender. That's what I also do, in the paper that I'm working on now that I would like to publish about articulate multi-narrative self, the autonography of becoming. I also try to move beyond the traditional formats, of presenting paper. I also try to incorporate like what Lindsay also mentioned about the structure of story. But aside from Labovian, William Labov, a mindset about, for example, instead of say, I start my paper with abstract, of course, like usual, and then also I continue with orientation instead of saying introduction. So that I would like to bring the readers actually to this story. And I also bring the series of action through, I call it assemblages of events. It's the same series of events. And I also bring like the complexity of the story. It's called uprootedness, moving away from my family. So yeah, I also come to with the resolution and coda, but I presented my coda with poetry instead of making conclusion. So that's also I cannot share because it's not published yet. It's still in the process, So that's what I also do, moving beyond coding too. So there's a lot of things that we can do. I think that's all that I can present for this. Let's go to the next.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ari. So this takes us to our interactive activity, which will take us a total of 15 minutes. So step one, we're going to ask that everyone on this Zoom workshop write a short narrative. Okay. in response to one prompt below. So the first one would be writing about a moment when you felt you belonged, or you can talk about a time you changed your mind, or a moment when teaching or learning transformed you. And our final prompt is a story of challenge or resilience in your work. So again, take 3 minutes and write a story using one of these prompts. Okay, if you could go ahead and start wrapping up your micro story. All right. So for our next step, in just a minute, I'm going to put you in groups of 3 or 4 randomly. And as a group, you are going to participate in story analysis. But before you start your analysis, please determine who will report out to the entire group. We probably won't have time for all of the groups to report out, but I will ask for volunteers once we return to the main Zoom room. So what are you going to do in your small group analysis? One person is going to read their micro story, okay? And then others are going to analyze for themes, positionality cues, emotions, tensions, and possible research question that the micro story evokes. Okay? So, and if you have time left over, you can move to a second story. But you only have 7 minutes. All right. So please, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms right now. And please determine who will report out once we return to the main Zoom room. Okay, it looks like we're all, or most of us are back. Okay, perfect. I hope you had rich discussions, and we also want, and so we want to share out now. And so we're going to take about 3 minutes to do this, because we're short on time. And if you take a look at step 3, we have debrief questions. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer if you can just give us a concise overview of the story you talked about, but then tell us how what you think about meaning making, and how that is worked through stories. Okay. So do we have a volunteer from one of the groups?
Go ahead, Miriam. Sure, Miriam would report out from group 5, I guess.
Okay, please go ahead.
Miriam?
Yeah, Mr. Gumgami. Hello. Yeah, hello everyone. This is Mariam Ashmilal from Morocco. We were in the same room. I mean, Mr. Mohammed Gumgami and we are colleagues. Just telling this to Stephanie. Okay. We were just two, so we shared our stories. Do I have to read my story and his?
No, just maybe share a brief overview of your story, if that's okay.
I will start with mine. I talked about a personal story, that occurred to myself because I'm a teacher, and I had one of my students who stuttered a lot. He had problems speaking, and I felt like an urge to intervene and to give him some pieces of advice, to see like a speech pathologist, to practice at home, see some techniques in order to, regain his self-confidence. That was my story. Mr. Gamgami's story was about curiosity, okay? It was like he once had like conversation with someone who tried to convince him, but in the end, he was not convinced. He became just more curious. Is that the story, Mr. Gamgami?
Yes.
Just correct me if I'm mistaken.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Concerning the themes, in my story, it was like the theme of sympathy, helping one another, collaboration, inclusion in education as well. And Mr. Gimgami's, story's theme was like curiosity, being convinced, etc. Okay. the emotions, we had a lot of emotions, especially in my case. I mean, in my story, because it relates to my own experience as a mother. My son also suffers from stuttering. He's like 5 years old. 5 years old, and from time to time he has problems speaking. He got blocked when he tries to say something, especially when he is telling stories. Okay, that's why I felt like pity. I sympathize with the case of anyone who has problems of stuttering. I mean, that's it. And in the case of Mr. Gemgami, I mean, he had like, we have like the theme of curiosity. What else, Mr. Gemgami? Curiosity, what else? I mean, I didn't have enough time to like
Conviction.
analyze.
Conviction.
Conviction.
I
Yeah.
posted it on the chat.
You posted it.
Yeah.
Fine, because I haven't posted anything so far.
Right.
Okay, that's it. Any more questions?
Sure. Can you just tell me how both of you made meaning? You did meaning making through your stories. Can you just talk just briefly about that? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah. Right.
All right, if I could jump in.
Sure.
This is Zakaria Buhmalan, assistant professor and a colleague of the two who are speaking. So, I think in the case of Professor Ashimlal, meaning making is worked through her story through emotion or emotion building, if I mean, so to speak, because she is sympathizing with the student based on her own experience, informed by her relationship, of course, with her son. So that is detrimentally emotional to her. So, so for her, the story or how she relates with the person is her seeing her son in that person. So I think it is strongly emotional in her case. In the case of Professor Gumgami, um,
Yeah. Thank
so
you.
so if you could just please not give a short.
Okay. Thank you, Zakaria. I guess meaning in 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 addition to what Zakaria has said, meaning is mostly about connections. So when there is meaning, we connect to a lot of things. So when we are connecting, we may interpret the meaning. That's how I can react to this question. Meaning is I guess socioculturally connected to time, to space, to people. So that's how I could explain meaning making through stories. Meaning basically it's about connections.
Yes, thank you so much through space, place, and time. Thank
Yeah.
you. Um, Unfortunately, we don't have time to share any more because we want to briefly go through Aber. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and Ari and I will respond via email. And if any questions bubble up after this, you are free to please feel free to email any either of us. Okay, Ari, ready for you to do a crash course in art space research.
Yep. So it seems that we are a little bit behind the schedule a bit, but it's okay. That's the dynamics. But I'm gonna try my best also to give like a brief in here. I was, it's supposed to be like in one session for this Aber. Aber is like a art-based educational research. So that is really interesting. That I would like to bring the example in here about photo voice and photo elicitation. So yeah, for photo voice actually is using recording visual image actually for catalyzed for change in community. So in research, we use the pictures of photos from the community members to make a change in the community. So based on Wang and Boris, 1997, initially actually it was about giving camera to the participants of the research in Yunnan, China. So by that, they can capture, all of the moments and their surroundings, in order to contest, for a better life in this women community in Yunnan, China. So it involved documentary photography, of course, So what is that? Documentary photography has been used to describe an immense array of visual styles, genres, and also commitments. So, yep, they're also involving this one. For example, in the case of and told by Worth and Adar about a Navajo tribe that they use also the technique of a photo voice in order to be able to make their social world. And also there's another case in Palestine, especially, that they use this photo techniques, the researcher in order to make sense of their life, just like what we discussed. And then it found that the Palestinians, were able to portray their lives as outsiders, as is not insiders of their own land. So that's how they make sense. They make meaning, that we discuss. So it's participatory research because the participants are actively, using photos and taking pictures and using their own. We are doing this project actually with Lindsay, also partnering with also our folks at Illinois State University, using voter voice of the participants. So there's a really good quote that I took from the source, Wang and Boris. If I could tell the story in words, I wouldn't need a log in camera. So let's go to photo elicitation. I really had to deal with time limitation, but we have to. And here, because I have the other things. So photo elicitation, based on Harper, is based on the simple idea of inserting photography into a research interview. So it's based on the case where a researcher named Lewis, not mistaken, put take the pictures in terms of understanding about phenomena or data that cannot be captured through traditional interview. So that's actually the historical background of doing photo elicitation in order to capture things, that cannot be told by interviewees, through interviews. So in here, the focus is researchers, of course, doing that. And yeah, okay, next about narrative in poetry. Next, we have the other one. That is also my area. Mostly I do this with poetry. So actually, poem has been narrative as a nature historically, like for instance, the 19th century, So poems have never been about only lyrics, but it's also about stories, about narratives already. But it's never been articulated, by people. As a poet myself, I always put my stories, in my poetry, you know. So there's a difference in there between lyricality, sorry, it's so hard to pronounce this, and poeticity. What I'm doing is poeticity mostly, not lyricality, because even though we have lyrics in poetry, but we do not make it only lyrics, without meaning, without sense, without any other translinguistic aspect. For example, we also have stanzas also in poetry, and we also have pause and fragments, in poetry. That is this not the same with lyric. I give you an example, lyricality, for example, prose. That is telling about story, but it's not in poetic way. So what is how to analyze? We analyze also from below word and also to word and also phrase, line, sentences, and section. Oh, I really hope that I could explain this one further. So we have the example in here from Basu, actually, our freshly graduate student, actually, at ASU. She was doing a project, living poetic, sorry, fun poetry. Fun poetry is like collaging, text and making it into poetry. So for example, in research, I'm not doing a literature review, systematic literature review. Basu, she was like compiling, all of the sources into poetry. And after that, she was trying to connect with her own personal life, That's why it's called poetic narration, So from the poetry that she created from the literature of the research that she was trying to do, she tried to connect with her own story, through making another poetry to respond to the poetry. So that's really interesting. So we have also Living Poetically, there's really good piece, using the stories of love through poetry. And also new Mestiza Anzaldua, Gloria Anzaldua, she's really big, and then she uses also poetry, to tell the stories. And interesting thing, she's trying to contest, Western hegemony of language by using also Spanish, you know, as the language also for poetry. So we are pushed to understand beyond our comfort, that we always try everything supposed to be in English. And she also tried to also incorporate, Spanish, as the language or medium to tell the story. Okay, so other visual arts in here. Okay, time is up in here. So we have the choreography, like a dance. You can also do collage as in query also, just like what I told you, and also like compiling some photos, and then after it's also in query. And writing through sculpture, I also did that. And also Zines, you can make like a community work, like a project, like Zine is like a magazine that you can also publish online and talking about community, and also painting as a research, and also you can do curation and also script. I wish I could talk more about this one, but thank you so much. And then, yeah, time is up. These are our references.
Yes,
Wonderful.
thank you everyone
So,
for attending, and please feel free to email us any questions you might have.
So I'm gonna go back to the beginning again. This one, our email in the bottom in here. You want to contact us? I can talk
Wonderful.
about this yeah, all the time. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Oh, I think we could stay on here all day if we had the time. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Uh, There is a link in the chat for everyone to fill out and give some feedback. And once you submit that, we'll be creating a PD certificate for you that will be sent out along with the slides, the references, and other upcoming events. So if you have a quick question, you can put it in the Q&A or feel free to email Ari and Lindsay. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.